What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Necrotic.
I'm Jammin, John.
And we have yet another album review for you, and one that we were definitely anticipating as well, because despite how much we might have shit on one djent band recently, we actually do have some djent bands we do like, and this is definitely one of them. So we are going to go over the latest offering from Tesseract, War of Being. This also comes out on the 15th of September on K-Scope Records. This band formed in 2003 in England. This is their fifth full-length overall. I've been a fan since their debut full-length, One, which is a fucking awesome album. Actually, their last album, Sonder, was absolutely killer as well. And for those that don't know, this is definitely a djent band, though I would say they border more on like progressive metal in general. They're pretty much in that same ilk as, well, Periphery. And I would say that this band appeals more towards like prog metal fans and alt metal fans versus Periphery appealing more towards metalcore and Warped Tour fans. Yeah, I'm still not done ragging on those vocals.
Yeah, I've been a fan of Tesseract since their first EP, Concealing Fate. Again, back in the last FM days, I found these guys and kind of instantly fell in love. It took me a minute to get into the vocals, so to speak. I had the first record, One, as an instrumental for a long time before I finally got into the vocals. But yeah, I would agree that these guys differ greatly from Periphery. It's all the cool groove without all the wankery.
Yeah, and we got to do like a little bit of a light comparison there, because these guys both came out at the same time and were kind of like spearheading that whole djent movement where, yeah, basically they were kind of dick riding Meshuggah, which a lot of bands did, and that's cool. But I think both of those bands, and I'm giving Periphery some credit here too, kind of took their own spin on it and kind of made it their own. Now, where Periphery went is someplace that I choose not to go very often or at all. And where Tesseract went with it, I actually choose to revisit that quite often because I think they do it quite well. And again, there's more of a focus on song structure. With Periphery, I just hear like a lot of clustering of djent riffs, very bottom heavy, very chuggy. And then there's Spencer, and I'm done talking about him because I can hear his voice in my head right now, and it's gonna ruin me. But with Tesseract, there's more space, there's more openness, there's more atmosphere, and song structure-wise, I feel like they kind of latch more onto just like prog metal in general.
I'm not gonna shit on Periphery quite as bad. I just don't like Spencer's vocals. Sounds like you're stepping on a dog toy.
Squeezing a hamster too hard.
but I mean, musically, I think Periphery still brings some entertaining stuff to the table. They're definitely very talented. I just think it is kind of a clusterfuck of riffs, whereas Tesseract is not that. Tesseract actually focuses more on writing a song and structuring a song and adding more elements to it than just a djenty riff.
And pretty much what we're talking about is just on display on here. The opening track, Natural Disaster, starts off with like these like looped creepy whispers, and then it just breaks into like some heavy syncopated riffs, and again there's like space in between the chugs. And in terms of vocal dynamics, Daniel Tompkins I think is a really underrated singer. This guy does a ton of different stuff, and honestly I think this is one of his best vocal performances on here, namely because there's an added intensity to this one. Arguably I would say some of this stuff is some of their heaviest material to date, like, really close to their debut album. And a lot of that is due in part to Daniel Tompkins' willingness to scream more on here. In fact, there's a lot of harsh vocals.
Yep. A lot of, like, I wouldn't say growls per se, but I mean, he definitely screams a lot more. There's a lot more yelling. It's a lot more, like, intense, in-your-face vocalization. Dan does such a good job of mixing pretty clean vocals with these more intense screams. Like, not to shit on Spencer some more, but I'm going to. Daniel just does it well, and I've seen both Periphery and Tesseract live, and Dan nails that shit.
Yeah.
Every time, whereas Spencer comes out flat sometimes.
This is definitely something that is on display in tracks like The Gray and the giant-sized title track. The frequent flips between like soft crooning, soaring vocals, and then just like belted out heavy screams really adds a dimension that I think was kind of missing when Daniel Tompkins came back. Initially, of course I welcome his clean vocals, he does well, but hearing some more screams every now and then, especially behind a heavier section, adds a lot of intensity. And honestly, War of Being might have some of the most intense moments this band has ever written.
Yeah, probably one of the heaviest things these guys have ever done, and equally probably one of the best songs they've ever written. There is so much going on in that song. Heavy parts, clean parts, djenty parts, jammy parts. For 11 minutes and 32 seconds, I was kind of afraid for a minute because I thought, is Tesseract going to be able to pull off a song of that length? But they did it. They fucking nailed it.
It's actually kind of, similar to Concealing Fate. Granted, it is one song versus, several songs that are essentially one song. It has a great dynamic in terms of like shifting from heavy parts to soft parts. There's really cool light percussion in it every now and then. The vocal dynamics are absolutely huge in that song, going from like some of the heaviest growls in the entire album to absolutely soaring chorus parts. And the pacing. The pacing of, I would say, this entire album in terms of their songs, it's very labored and very much focused on building. Almost sort of a post-metal sort of thing. But again, done with their kind of token lush atmosphere, which they excel at. The clean guitars, the very chimey, kind of wispy guitars that are behind all the bottom-heavy djent riffs, that is something that is like a hallmark of their sound. And the way that Jay Postones and Amos Williams play off of that rhythmically, which, this band's rhythmically tighter than fucking a lot of bands. It's just really ridiculous to try to follow these guys, but it creates this really cool atmosphere that is, complex and alluring, but also very hooky.
And I do want to elaborate a little bit more on Jay Postones and Amos Williams' rhythm work. These guys have to be one of the tightest rhythm sections out there as of right now. And a lot of these songs incorporate drum and bass groove, like isolated drum and bass groove. In The Gray, Legion, Burden, which is a fuck of a song, which contains mostly drum and bass. There's actually not a lot of guitar in that song. And then again in Sacrifice, just the isolated bass and drum moments. I already think that Jay Postones is a human metronome. I know there's a lot of djent drummers out there, but I've studied Jay Postones a lot, and that guy is ridiculous. And to find a bass player that works so well in tandem with that, it's in this record, dude. I'm blown away by the bass and drum work.
The funky accents that Amos puts on, and matching that with the weird off-time patterns that Postones just comes up with. And again, like, you even have some cool rhythmic stuff that Daniel Tompkins does vocally as well. So like rhythmically, this is sort of a feast right here of just really interesting songwriting dynamics. And something else interesting that I think Tesseract excels at is accessibility without sacrificing much of their sound. They have kind of the same appeal as a band like Carnival or Soen. Well, maybe not so much the more recent Soen albums. Just check out our reviews for a more elaborate opinion on the last two Soen albums. Anyway, they definitely have that appeal where they know how to write good choruses, good hooks. There's a fierce sense of melody on here that is all across the board. Even in its more heavy moments, there's always a good, catchy melody of some kind. And while accessibility is like kind of a dirty word to some in terms of metal, they do it well, and they still do it with complexity. Like Echoes, Legion, even The Gray has great sing-along parts, but it's also balanced out with some clever songwriting and interesting use of djent riffs and just straightforward riffs, and again, interesting drum patterns and songwriting dynamics. So, while it is very hooky and would definitely appeal to, fans of like Soen's more current stuff, that's not us, it doesn't come across as generic. In fact, it comes across as like kind of a signature thing of this band.
It's like I've always kind of said about this band. If I didn't really love this band, I don't know if I would like it, because there's so many tropes in here that I don't normally latch onto, like the clean vocals, like the clean soprano vocals sung by a man. That doesn't necessarily jive with me sometimes, or overuse of melody. That doesn't always jive with me either. But it's the way that they do it that makes it creative and unique. Like, they always have melody, but sometimes it sits in the background in the atmosphere. There's always like a soft like guitar thing going on in the background. And vocally, I've always said that if you're going to do vocals like this, you have to do it well. And Daniel does it well, and he does it well all the time, and especially on this record.
And Daniel goes all out in here. In fact, as I said, I think this is one of his wildest vocal performances. You get down to like Legion, there is some insane flipping between like high, like very wispy vocals to flat out growls to, croons. It's honestly kind of hard to keep up with. Like his vocal cords seem to be having like multiple seizures, and well, at least they're doing it in tune and key, because it sounds really cool and it's super impressive. Like, even if I wasn't necessarily a fan of this band, I would be very impressed. But hearing him shift between like the heavier vocals on The Gray to like, the cleaner vocals on that song, or, the entire song of the title track is just impressive as hell, going from, again, some of the heaviest vocals to, again, the more atmospheric, the more high-pitched ones. It's super impressive, and again, he adds a layer of atmosphere. I mean, there's definitely a fair amount of like vocal filters and tons of layering on the vocals. Like, they definitely wanted to make this album sound absolutely huge, and well, I mean, the production here, it sounds really good. It's a big sounding album.
It's gigantic.
Especially the drums. Dude, Jay's fucking snare sounds like someone firing off a handgun in the Grand Canyon. It's massive and reverby. No, it's cool. I like it. But yeah, it's fucking huge.
I mean, there's a reason he was initially sponsored by Crush Drums, an off company that no one had ever heard of, and is now sponsored by DW. I mean, you gotta be good to get sponsored by DW, so... Yeah, but his snare drum is massive. It sounds like a shotgun blast.
And there's a couple of songs in here where they kind of get a little bit outside of what they do. Like, again, Echoes and Legion have maybe like a little bit more straightforward sort of, vibe to them, like more 4/4 time rhythms. They're a little bit less complex, or they get more complex as they go on. They don't start off that way. But the song that really stood out to me was Sirens. Sirens has more electronic flourishes. There's some like weepy guitars that are kind of haunting, and honestly it's more vocally driven, and I mean, it kind of sounds like a djenty Peter Gabriel song, and it became one of my favorites. It's vastly different than I would say anything else on here. The guitars really do take a back seat in the song, which kind of makes it sound different. They kind of sound like a deadened like rhythmic chug. Actually, the bass is probably a little bit more prominent in the guitars. They're doing more atmospheric stuff, but it's a weird kind of haunting, poppy, atmospheric song, and generally poppy stuff kind of puts me off, but it's so well done and it's infectiously catchy.
Mm-hmm. And Burden was the same way for me. I know I've talked about this song a lot, but the fact that there's not a lot of guitar work at all until the very end. The very end, you get a pretty like heavy breakdown section, but it's mostly drum and bass, and with just light atmosphere in the background. Like, to me, that really stood out because I've never heard them do that before, where it's just bass and drums predominantly throughout the song, and I thought that was a really just unique presentation in the album.
And I think like one of the main strengths of this album are some of the longer songs in here, because they really just explore the dynamics of the song. Lots of big, like long bridges of cool instrumentation. Sacrifice, I think, is a really solid closer, and it does kind of a cool thing with the long build. Like, it builds up in layers and it gets gradually more intense as it goes on. And the drum and bass section on that song in particular is so damn good. And that's also kind of apparent in the song Tender, which honestly feels a little bit more singly for them. It's, a little bit more stripped down, and it does start off very tender. It's kind of a very soft jam up until, again, like the last part. Kind of has that same sort of build as Burden. Albeit maybe not as interesting. I do think it's a good song, but it was one that kind of just like, well, I mean, it's all right.
Yeah, it was kind of a song that was just there, like a super somber lead-in, very spacey and melodic like they like to do, but like it took forever to get there, and then when it finally did get heavy, it's only in the background. There's still not actually much to that riff. And then a long lead-out.
Which is an issue on here. This album is over an hour long, and granted, it is mostly about the music and all the transitions, but there are some seriously long lead outs on here on some of these tracks. And while that does, help with the flow of the album, it hangs on too long. Like, I only need about like 10 to 15 seconds of a lead out, and they're going like 30 seconds to a minute.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Echoes, The Gray, Legion, and Sacrifice all have lead outs that last like a minute and a half. And sometimes you get like a little bit of a melodic hint in there, or like in Legion where it's got kind of a false ending. I can see how they could use this live.
Yeah.
But leave the lead outs at least of that length for live. Like, you could easily trim 3 minutes off this album.
Maybe 5.
Yeah, by cutting out those lead outs.
And while I really like Daniel Tompkins' vocal performance on here, I think this is one of the ones where he really just pushed himself. Sometimes I think it is a bit much, like namely on Legion. Legion, again, it kind of goes off the rails with the constant vocal shifts, and you already have constantly shifting rhythms, transitions that are very smooth but hard to pick up on occasionally. And rhythmically, this band is still super challenging. So honestly, I would say, like, for me, that was a case of doing a little bit too much. And honestly, in some of the more quiet moments, the more just, reflective, calm moments where they kind of drop out everything except for like a droning melody in the background, adding all the layers to the vocals on that, it kind of takes away from the intimacy. And, they frequently do a lot of vocal effects in here. Now, granted, Daniel can fucking do this shit live. We've seen it.
Yep.
But that choice there, I don't know, that felt like a touch too much in the production.
Yeah, because that song is somber in nature. Like, and it's mostly in its entirety. Like, it's a very calm, quiet, reflective thing. And to add in like a sea of vocals on top of that just kind of takes away from the overall vibe of that song.
A person alone thinking out loud, essentially.
Sure.
Yeah. But outside of that, I think this is really solid album. Like, I anticipated a really good one. The lead-off single being the giant-sized title track was super impressive right out of the gate, and honestly the rest of this album is really solid. It bounces around a lot, it has a lot of cool dynamics, and honestly it's Tesseract doing what Tesseract does well. So overall I'm going to give this 4 stars. I think this is an excellent album. I like the fact that they pushed heavier on a lot of sections here. The harsher vocals add a little bit more punch to the heavier moments. Before, when Daniel was actually singing over the heavier moments, granted it was good, but it kind of missed the impact because those riffs hit hard. Yeah. They hit harder when he's screaming, and honestly that adds just another layer, another dynamic to it. And that is one of the main things in here that I think really made this sink in, especially in its heavier moments, which again, this has some seriously heavy moments. I think the songwriting is fantastic. It's paced really well. A little long in the tooth, and definitely some stuff that could have been trimmed off. But overall, this is a solid album if you are a big fan of Tesseract, arguably Periphery, but also like, of course, Meshuggah and again, Carnival and Gojira too.
Yeah.
Throw them in there as well. Check this out. You'll probably dig it.
It's a 4 for me as well. Although I kind of knew it would be. I've been a big fan of this band for a long time. They can do really no wrong, in my opinion, except for maybe Ash's vocals on Altered State. But that's neither here nor there. The music was still killer. I think the sound of this record is something that they've been kind of chasing after for a while. And you can see it in the lead up from, Polaris to Sonder, which definitely was leading along these lines. Like, they've kind of taken that sound that they've been looking for and just finally brought it all together with War of Being. The songwriting dynamics are definitely something that shows a lot more now. Like, it seems like they know how to really, really write a song and really incorporate lots of parts to help this be attractive to the more proggy side of things while still being accessible for maybe the not-so-seasoned listener, while making it still challenging for people that have been listening to music like this for a long time. Because djent music in itself, I remember when I first got into it, djent music in itself is challenging. You're like, what the fuck? Those rhythms don't make any sense. But like, these guys have always found a great way to make everything sound challenging without sounding overly chaotic. The rhythm work in this record is top-notch. You guys fucking nailed it. Like, as a percussionist myself, like, I've just spent the whole time just going, yeah. Like, it was great. Daniel's vocal performance, I've always been a fan of Daniel Tompkins, but like, he really hit the mark here in a lot of places, from his his cleans and his croonings to the, like you were talking about, the more intensity brought forth by the vocals. Like, every time this record gets heavy, Dan finds a way to fucking nail it with his vocals, and it just adds so much to the overall emotion and feeling of this. I feel like I'm babbling. Overall, 4 stars. If you're a fan of Tesseract, you're probably really gonna like this. Periphery, because they are in the same vein. Any of the cool djent bands that are out there, definitely Meshuggah. Yeah, you're gonna love this. I would recommend picking it up.
So, if you enjoyed this review, give it a thumbs up, and if you're new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there's a link down below to thrallsmetal.com. Our Patreon link is there, as well as our store. We have shirts, we have hats. Definitely check them out. We are super happy with how they turned out.
Yay!
And eventually we'll probably wear some in a video just to show you more. But for now, you have to click the link.
And then October 1st at Frankie's in Toledo, Ohio, our hometown venue, is bringing back metal, thank God. Revocation, Unearth, Entheos, and High Command are there October 1st. $25, dude. You can't not do it. Dude, I've seen Revocation live like 5 times. This is in a small venue. It's going to whoop ass. In fact, one of the first times I saw Revocation was at Frankie's.
Same. I was there.
But, yeah, it's going to be a night of riffs, because God, is that Unearth album packed full of riffs, and Entheos, and it's just going to be a night of riffs and fun and metal. Come out.
And of course, thank you guys so much for liking, subscribing, following, all that shit. It means the world to us. Tons of stuff on the horizon. I'm going to have to cut this short because the battery is starting to run out.
Sorry.
So
thank you.
I want to make sure we get all that out. But again, thank you guys so much for everything you guys do, and we will catch you later.